My name's Monk Rowe. I'm very pleased to have David Spinozza with me this morning. And let's see, we're in New Hartford, New York, after a gig. Thanks for coming.
Nice to be here.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to hear you play last night, and we'll talk about that. But I'm going to quote you. This is just from like a half an hour ago at breakfast.
Yeah.
You're a very quotable guy, and you said, "I'm a quick learner and a quick forgetter."
Yes.
Remember you said that. And in the brief time you were sort of describing your career, I realized that you've been the recipient of some moments that you didn't necessarily cause to happen, but like happy accidents?
I would say yes, yes. Probably because when I came up, I was a rhythm and blues guitar player, basically. I never really considered myself a jazz guitarist, because when I certainly listened to a lot of jazz players, Wes Montgomery, Joe Pass, people like that, Chuck Wayne, all these guitarists. I knew who they were, but I was mostly playing rhythm and blues. I had horn bands, and I learned to arrange because the horns would say, well, what do we play? And I started to figure out how to write for horns and stuff like that. So I became, kind of a chameleon in the music business. And that's how I got started.
You just gave me a flash because I was able to interview Howard Johnson.
Oh, sure.
And he talked about getting a call to play a John Lennon session, which I know you had done, but it might have been before. At any rate, John Lennon just had this thought that when you get in professional horn players, that something magic just happens.
Yeah,
they know what to do.
Like they know what parts to play.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's funny.
So where did you access in your head how to write for horns? Was there something you heard growing up that you were paying attention to?
I used to listen to, it was funny, even some of my guitar lines come from horn players. I got most of how I play jazz from listening to horn players. Like I would listen to Lee Morgan, for instance, like that. I had that record Sidewinder, I arranged that a few times for my band. But I was studying music theory in high school. I had a really good music theory teacher. So he would teach me how to take dictation, how to write stuff out. And so I was learning how to do that anyway. And I sort of wrote right off the guitar. Like the voicings on the guitar are almost like drop two voicings, which is a big band style of writing. And I would just write stuff off the guitar and write it out for horn players, and they'd play it, and it sounded good. And I was able to make four horns sound pretty big just because of voicing. So I started that at like 13, 14 years old. I was already writing for horns and stuff in my band. So I always had like two trumpets, an alto sax, a bari, a tenor or something, 4 or 5 horns. And that's how I started writing.
If you're writing for just two, did you discover like what's the most effective thing of the notes and the chords?
As far as writing for two instruments?
Just two horns, yeah.
For two horns, to me, it's always the third and the seventh. The first thing I would do is drop the tonic, drop the fifth. You don't need that. It's going to be implied in the piano part and the bass line and this and that. So it was always like, third and the seventh.
Isn't it interesting how, the music business has changed dramatically, but the idea of let's start a band is still there.
Yeah.
Like what drives that? What drove you into this business?
Into the business of band? Well, when I was a kid, I used to go to this place called the Canada Lounge, which was in Mamaroneck, New York. And there was a band called the Orchids. And they were an R&B band. Guitar player was named Link Chamberlain. He was ahead of his time. He could bend the strings and do all this stuff that I'd never really heard. It wasn't really jazz. It was sort of almost like country playing. And this was before light gauge strings, but Link had I guess, became an expert of bending the strings and all that stuff. And that's the first time I heard that type of playing. And for me, I got turned on. That's why I played the way I played today, because I was inspired by this guy, Link. And Link would listen to like Roy Buchanan, James Burton, who played with Elvis Presley. There were guys that played that certain style. They were Telecaster players, which then I became a Telecaster player because I sort of idolized Link. And I'd go listen to him in that club. And that got me playing that sound. That got me wanting my own band, because they had horns in that band. So they only had like 2. So I said, I'm going to have 4. So my bands had 4 horns, you know, and that was the thing. And we also had choreography. We were like a show band. We did steps. We did all that kind of stuff. I was a showman. I used to front the band sometimes and dance. And sometimes I had a guitar player. I wouldn't even play the guitar. I would just be the front man. And I would sing and dance. And I was all into that whole thing in the beginning also, yeah.
Did you have aspirations, as most bands do, of like, let's make a record? Let's get a deal.
Well, the thing was, as funny you said that, we were sort of a cover band. We didn't really write a lot of originals. We were covering a lot of stuff. James Brown, Otis Redding, you know, we played some of Joe Tex. We were doing a lot of covers. So I don't think we really dreamed too much about having a record deal. And then finally we did write some songs. We got a 1 deal thing with Mercury. I had a band called Giant, and we did 1 album. And it was I wrote most of the stuff, but we weren't thinking original songs, and that's usually where it comes from. You have to write original material to get a record deal, you know.
Did you have an option of another line of work? Because I remember last night I heard you saying that, you know, I just worked weekends. It never occurred to me that I might make a living. I might be extrapolating on what you said, but was there another option for you?
No, I had no other option. No, I mean, all I did was play the guitar. I was a high school dropout. I never went to music college. I don't have a degree in music or anything like that. I left school in the middle of the 11th grade, went on the road with one of my bands, a 10-piece band. We went down to Miami, and we had to play opposite Wayne Cochran and the CC Riders that blew us out of the water. I mean, we were a good band, but that band was killing. I remember going back to going, well, I want to do this. I want to be a musician. And I said to my mother, I don't want to go back to school. I just want to. And then I left my band and started getting calls to do session work. That's why, as I told you earlier, I never really learned a lot of the standards or anything like that, because by the time I was 17 and a half, 18, I started getting calls from Manhattan to go play recording sessions.
Why? Why did people know your name to have you do that?
I think what happened was, one of my friends growing up was Tommy Mottola, who became the president of CBS College. But at the time, he wanted to be a singer, like a Fabian or one of those good hair guys, you know, that sang. And he was doing a demo for a company, and he said, and he wanted me to play on the record. And there was an arranger named Horace Ott, who went on to produce YMCA and all that stuff. He was an R&B arranger, but he was doing the arrangements, I think, for Tommy. Tommy was doing a session. Tommy said, do you mind if I bring my friend David in to play the guitar? And Horace said, well, as long as you can keep up, because this session, he's going to be playing with session musicians, and if he can keep up, it's okay, but if not, you know. So I went to the session, and the rhythm section was Chuck Rainey, Bernard Purdy, Richard T., and me. And that's the first time I heard those guys play, and I obviously could keep up, and everybody liked me. And then Horace Ott started calling me to play in his sessions. So then I was doing maybe 2 sessions a week for Horace. That's how it started out.
And you were how old then?
About 18.
Wow.
And then I'd take the train in from Mamaroneck, New York, which was about 30 minutes from the city, and drag my amp to the Grand Central Station and go to sessions for Horace Ott. And that started me with playing dates. And then it was just word of mouth. People heard about me, and I started getting calls for other.
You must have been a quick learner as far as
yeah, quick learner and a quick forgetter.
A quick learner and a quick forgetter. But the whole thing about being in the studio.
Yeah.
Okay, let's double track that. Let's all the little stuff that happens. Let's punch in the guitar for a measure.
Right.
That's like, even if you had gone to music school, you wouldn't have learned that.
No.
It's just like on-the-job training.
Right. It was totally on-the-job training. I mean, I got to sit next to musicians that were just, absurdly good. And I was always worried, oh my God, they're going to find out I'm not as good as they think I am. I was pretty stressed out with the musicians I played with were just, ridiculous. I mean, I came from a little town. I was a big fish in the little town. All of a sudden, New York City, it was a different ball game.
Do you remember the first time you did a session where you sat down and like it was an uh-oh, maybe because everything was like written out?
Oh yeah. Oh, I'll give you a good one. Oliver Nelson, right? And I get this call, and I go in, and it's the whole sax section. It was a big band, and me. I forgot what record it was for or something. And there was an introduction, an 8-bar introduction, with the sax section unison with the guitar, playing like bebop, fast bebop lines. And I looked at it, it just all looked like black to me. I couldn't figure out what it was. And thank God the tape machine broke, and somebody said, guys, take a 15-minute break. And now the guys on the session were like Jerome Richardson, Jerry Dodge, and Eddie Daniels, that bunch, Ronnie Cuba. It was like, and they were struggling playing the bebop thing. And these sax players, they read it for lunch. I'm looking at it like, oh, and I'm supposed to play it in unison. So I remember, I'll never forget, I took the music, I went into the bathroom, because I had studied theory, so I could solfege in my head, and I figured if I could sing it to myself in my head, then I could translate it to the guitar. So I went in the stall, and I actually was so stressed out that this was the session where they're going to find out I'm not that good. I threw up in the toilet. I was so nervous. Then I just sat there, kept looking at it, and like learned it in my head. Then the 15 minutes was over, went back, stomped it off, and I played it. That was the date I thought, they're going to find out I'm not that good, and this is the end of my career.
I could just see it now. The sax players are leaving and go, that cat played that thing on the guitar. Wow, he's really good.
When the sax section said, can we try it a little slower? I said, I don't have a prayer. They wanted to play it slower. And you're a sax player, so those guys read fly shit. I mean, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I have to play this with them?
On the opposite end of the spectrum, when you go to a session and you get nothing but chord charts.
Not always. No, not always.
Sometimes you get a
not
chord
everybody
chart.
knows how to write for the guitar that well, because it's very physical. You have to know the physicality of the guitar to write for it, especially if you're writing multiple notes and stuff like that. chord voicings and stuff. You really have to know the instrument. And a lot of arrangers don't necessarily know the instrument, but you never knew. Some days you walked in and they wanted you to make up a guitar part. There was just chords. And that's also part of the thing about being a studio musician. You have to know when you walk in there, am I making up a part today to make this song sound better? Or is everything going to be written and I'm just asked to play exactly what's on the page? And you just never knew from session to session which thing it was going to be.
If it was a record for backing up a singer, a singer's record,
yeah.
Did you usually hear a scratch vocal or something that...
Some sessions.
Because it affects the way that you play if you're hearing what's the singer doing.
Yeah, it's different. Sometimes they would call it a dummy vocal, meaning it wouldn't be the final vocal, that somebody would just sing the song. It might not even be the artist. They would just sing it along so you could hear them while we were playing it. But some arrangers, like Van McCoy, for instance, who was an arranger, he produced a lot of the stylistic stuff when the stylistics started doing stuff. And this is after they were out of Philly or wherever they were from originally. Then they started doing stuff in New York. And Van was so specific with his charts. You just read the charts, no vocal. You never heard the vocal until the record came out. And it was all, so once again, you never knew which situation you were going to walk into. But Van wrote every note out that he wanted. So you just played it, even though it was rhythm and blues, it was written out. And you had to just play every part. We never heard the vocal until the record came out.
Until you're in the car and
you one day I'm in the car and
the radio.
Well, that track sounds familiar. And then I realized I had played on it, but I'd never heard the melody. So there's a lot of things. It's always, like I said, you just didn't know. Every situation was different. I think the thing that made the studio musicians was our ability to adjust quickly and learn quickly and unlearn, and you just never knew. Am I making a part up? Am I reading a part? So you really had to, know which cap you're wearing that day.
After you had done that for a bunch of years, did you ever turn anything down because of the kind of music it was?
Not because of I turned it down sometimes because if I didn't like the producer or the arranger, if I thought it was going to be, they were like taskmasters and, or something that I just didn't agree with, I would turn it down. Once I was established and, was making enough money to say no, sometimes I would turn it down based on how much stress I thought the session was going to be,
And the average session was 4 hours a day or?
So usually 3 hours. They would book it as 3 hours with a possible 20 or 3 hours with a possible 40. There was always this possible thing. They would say that so that you wouldn't book something right away. Like if you had a 10 to 1, they didn't want you to have a 1:30 book somewhere because just in case they needed the overtime. So they would book sessions in 3 hour increments with a plus 20 or a plus 40.
What would cause a studio musician to stop getting called?
We stopped being called because the last session you played on you didn't rise to the occasion.
The last session?
Yeah, I mean, to me, you were always as good as your last call, and everybody lived in fear of that, of like, oh my God, they're going to hear I couldn't sight read this thing, or I was out of tune, or whatever it was.
And so the contractors would like.
And the contractor would know, and if the producers complained to the contractor, I don't want to see that guy again, or whatever, that would be it. That's why it was so stressful, because you really were only as good as your last phone call. You were never sure there was going to be another session. In fact, there's a joke about it. Just two musicians or something are talking one day, and this one musician said to the other musician, "Did you hear last week I played a score for a movie?" And then he said, "And then did you hear I met Marilyn Monroe? I'm sleeping with Marilyn Monroe." And he said, "Oh, and by the way," he said, "did you hear I played this one session? I was a little out of tune." "Yeah, I heard about that." That's kind of what it was like.
That was the news.
That was the news. Yeah, I heard about that.
You mentioned producers. And you eventually got into production.
I did, yeah.
Yeah, so on all these sessions, this is a guess on my part, but you were observing how producers worked.
Yeah, I was learning. I was learning how to produce, and I was learning how to arrange for singers. I mean, how to write when there's a vocalist, and I was paying attention to that. I was always a musical, study. I was always studying. I took classical guitar lessons. I took orchestration lessons with a lady named Ariadna Mikeshina. She was a Russian composer. I studied with her for 6 years on my own. So I didn't go to college or anything, but I did it on my own. I studied classical guitar and orchestration. And I was always interested in how you write for singers and not get in the way of the vocal. I was always fascinated by that.
And your score pads, did you have a line for what the singer was actually singing?
I'd always write the melody out first on the score pad, so I knew what the melody was, and then I'd write the rest of the stuff.
And where did you get the melody from? Did someone send you a demo or something?
They sent me a demo, or maybe there was a lead sheet or something. Yeah.
And as a producer, did you have liberty to say, "This is the instrumentation I want"?
Yeah, discussion. You would be a discussion, and finally you would agree on what it should be. Yeah.
Did you play on the sessions you produced?
Sometimes, but sometimes I would play afterwards because it was too much. It was too much, conducting the orchestra and stuff like that, than to play and conduct. I mean, you can do that from the piano conducting, but the guitar, it's a little. So if I did, I would usually overdub.
And your scores were handwritten. Of course,
handwritten
this is pre-finale,
yes.
pre-Sibelius.
Yeah, pre-Sibelius, pre-finale. Yeah, all handwritten.
Did you ever make a mistake?
Usually not, because I was so worried about there being a mistake in musician. How you could get bogged down at rehearsal if a lot of the musicians are saying, "Excuse me, is that a C or a C sharp?" That kind of thing. So I would really go over each part and make sure, that it was right. And then I had a copyist, and then if the copyist saw something, they'd say, "David, did you mean the C sharp there, or was it a C natural?" So by the time I went to the studio, it was copied out and right. I mean, I prided myself on nobody asking me a note question.
And that gets passed on the chain too, David, man, he's got his stuff together.
Yeah, and that's what happens. Then people realize you have your stuff together, and you'll get called, because on a session, the clock is on. The recording session, Atlantic Records or A&M Records is paying for a 3-hour session for 40-piece orchestra. You can't have people going, "Where's the coda? Do we repeat that?" Or you can't have that. So I prided myself on watching the arrangers that I looked up to, that really took care of business, and I learned from them how to prepare a score and how to run a recording session.
And how to write for strings.
And how to write for strings and everything, yeah.
Yeah, because it's embarrassing if you write something and the cellist goes, "We don't play that low."
Yeah, we don't have that
ouch.
note. Yeah, I prided myself on that too. I memorized all the ranges of all the instruments. I've never written a note, that wasn't playable. And when that Barry sax got that low A key in the 60s, I was, yes. You know, like all that kind of stuff. I learned all that stuff. I prided myself on knowing the range and the transpositions. When I first started writing, I wrote transposed, you know.
The score
was transposed.
Wow.
Yeah.
I always had an issue with that.
Now I don't do it so much. Now it's a Baelius because it'll do it. I don't do it. But back in the day, I mean, if it was the baritone sax, I wrote in E flat. You know, if it was the tenor sax, I knew it sounded down a ninth. You know, and if it was a trumpet, you know, it sounded down a tone. I mean, I knew all the transpositions and all that stuff. I memorized all of those.
Did you save all your scores?
I didn't. I used to throw them out right after the session. I'd throw them in the trash can.
Oh.
Yeah, I didn't think they'd be worth anything in the future. I really didn't.
And then you got into the jingle business.
Yeah, I got into the jingle business. And that was an interesting thing because a lot of guys wanted to do jingles because jingles were, the pay scale was really good. You were there for an hour, and if the TV spot went national, you'd make residuals. Every 13 weeks, you get a residual check, you know, $50 or something. But it added up if you did a lot of them. So what happened was there was this guy named Joey Levine, who basically was the godfather of bubblegum music. He was the one who had that record, Yummy, 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 I Got Love in My Tummy. So I met him one day, and I said to him, I always said, if I ever met the guy that sang that song, I want to kill him. That's such a ridiculous song. And I told Joey, and he said, that's really funny. He said, you know, I have a jingle business. Do you know how to put music? Because I don't write music. I don't know how to write it down. Do you know how to write it down? I said, yeah. He said, because when I go to my sessions, I have to sing parts. I go, that's crazy, Joe. And I became his arranger. Because he wrote all these great spots. I mean, he wrote I Love My Mounds, you know, he wrote Mounds and Time Magazine and all these things. And I was the arranger on a lot of those spots because Joey needed somebody to conduct the band and write the stuff out. So for a while, 15 years, I was in the jingle business, just writing out Joey melodies.
I find it fascinating that some of the most memorable hooky things come from, as you say, people who can't write it down.
Yeah.
They just hear it.
Yeah, well, we call them hummers, right? We call them hummers. Hummers. But they come up, like Joey could come up with a hook in a heart, like a 2-bar hook that you just say, how the hell did you come up with that? Meanwhile, I could write for a 40-piece orchestra, but I couldn't come up with a hook like that. So there's different talents within the whole musical world. Yeah.
And did you have to deal with the ad people who would come in and say things like,
yes,
make it sound yellow?
Oh, yes, we have. Yes, that was one of my least favorite things, was dealing with the ad people. But you know, we call them the suits. When the suits get here, they're going to ask for this and they're going to ask for that, and you know, and you have to try to placate the situation, and you do the best you can. Yeah, but I didn't have to go to a lot of those meetings because it was Joey's company. Later on, when I left Joey, I had my own jingle business for a few years at the tail end of the jingle business, and then I had to go to the meetings and do all that stuff. I didn't really care for it, so I didn't last very long after that in that business. I didn't really care for it.
Did you have time during this period to get out and play gigs, or did you want to? I was still gigging here and there, you know, and had a little band with John Tropez. We had, you know, we did stuff, weekend stuff here and there. I didn't have to do that. And then I did Sunday Night Live for 3 years with Marini. For the first 2 years, I was actually the conductor for 81 to 83. And then I played guitar in the band after that for a while. So I did a whole bunch of different. My career was very eclectic. That's Saturday Night Live is another kind of pressure, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, it's live television, you know. There was a lot of pressure.
And was it a day of rehearsal beforehand?
Not really a day, just the same day a lot of times. So at 11 o'clock, you come in at noon and rehearse whatever song was going to be on that night. Then they would tape it. They do a taping around 7:30. And they do a 2-hour taping, but then they'd edit it down to an hour and a half when it was going to go live at 11 o'clock or whatever it was. So it was an all-day Saturday thing mainly. It wasn't too much rehearsal for the band. Probably the cast, yes, but not the band.
What's your attitude about, there's a Saturday Night Live, a couple things where people come out and they're lip syncing.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
They're just singing with tracks, but they're not really, no, they're singing, but they're singing to tracks.
Yeah.
Did that occur when you were on the band, or was that later on?
That didn't occur when I was on the band. But when I did, the first time I played Saturday Night Live, here's an interesting story. The first time I played Saturday Night Live, I was working with Carly Simon. I was her musical director for about 2.5, 3 years. And she was going to be on the show singing You're So Vain. And she has a little stage fright thing that kicks in every now and then. So she didn't want to do it live, so we actually recorded it at the noon show. This was in the 70s. And they recorded her thing, so they plugged it in at night. She really didn't, she sang live, but it was live in the video. They put the video in when it was her turn at night. That was the first time I think that Saturday Night Live ever did that. So it wasn't really the nilly vanilly thing of her not singing, but it wasn't live. We taped it at noon. They plugged it in when they said, and now Carly Simon, we had taped it.
Being a musical director, did you know what the term meant?
No. I became these things by accident. I became a session musician. I didn't know what a session musician was. I just wanted to play the guitar. You know, I mean, it was like, okay, now you're a session musician. Okay, now I'm a session musician, whatever.
And you played with Thad Jones-Mel Lewis.
I did play with Thad Jones-Mel.
I have to hear this story again.
Well, I used to go Monday nights. I'd go down because I was always loving big band stuff, and I would call myself, as far as jazz, I call myself a closet jazzer because I practiced jazz at home, and I used to listen to Wes Montgomery records and Joe Pass and all that stuff, and I would learn the stuff, but I never really played out. I never played jazz in a club or anything like that. I didn't do that. But I was fascinated with the arranging of big band stuff. So Monday nights I would go down to the Village Vanguard, I think they played every Monday, and I'd go down there, and Dad would see me sitting there all the time. And one time, after about 2 months of going every Monday night, Dad comes up to me and said, hey, you're here, you're a horn player, right? I said, no. He said, well, you're here every Monday night. What are you doing? I said, I just love the band. I love the charts. The Bobby Brookmeyer, Willow Weep for me. I remember all that stuff, and then Dad's charts. And I said, I just love the writing. And he said, well, what do you play? I said, I'm a guitarist. And he said, well, we're doing an album in a couple of weeks. You want to play something like that? And somebody must have told him I was a good player. Jerome Richardson was. I knew Jerome. I knew Jerry Dodge and Eddie Daniels a little bit. I didn't know them well. John Faddis was playing lead at the time at the band, and they were doing the record Consummation. They had never had a guitar in that band, and I wound up playing on that album.
It's wild.
Once again, I just backed into it.
So you were on that tune, a hunk, a hunk?
Yeah, I'm on a hunk, hunk. That's me. Yeah. And I remember feeling like, this is strange, because the band never had a guitar. And it's really funny, because even when I write for big band, I don't really hear a guitar in it. And I'm a guitarist, but when I write for big band, I don't really think it has to have a guitar.
Yeah.
But it's just funny that I got asked to do it, and I laughed. And Thad, and that was when Thad had that beautiful song, A Child Is Born. You know that ballad he wrote? Oh, gorgeous. I mean, I heard it before I recorded it. I heard them play it on Monday nights on there, and then they recorded it. And I was like, oh man, what a beautiful melody.
Speaking of beautiful melodies, last night you played, Lou called one of your tunes, and
you got money for
it was called, no, I got like $3 here. I'm looking for the card where I wrote your tune down.
Oh.
It was called, Doesn't She Know By Now?
Oh yeah, that's my song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wrote down the first phrase, ba-ba-da-da-da-da.
Yeah, yeah.
It goes with the title.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Doesn't she know by now?
Yeah, I did. I do that sometimes. I write with the lyric in mind and think of the lyric.
So the song has a lyric.
It doesn't have a lyric, just that.
But it could.
Well, somebody
That's why I'm just
that's
saying.
interesting you said that. Somebody wrote a lyric to it that I didn't ask to. I can't remember her name right now. She wrote a lyric to it later. It wasn't. I just wrote it with the title. Da 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 da. That thing. And in fact, it was never really a full verse or anything. But you know who sang on the record? Luther Vandross. And it's on my solo album. I had a solo album on A&M. And Luther wrote and sang all the background parts. And all they say through the whole song is, doesn't she know by now?
Do you still on occasion hear things either on Sirius Radio or wherever that you recognize yourself, or you think
I would recognize a song. I don't know if I'd recognize myself, but I might recognize the song and then realize I played on it.
Okay, well I'm going to, this is, you remember Downbeat Magazine used to do a blindfold test?
Yeah.
And these people would be put in this situation.
Right.
And they're trying to name the players.
Name the players? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could do that.
Some the people were smart, like they didn't even try to. they would just talk about the song. Oh, I really like that. How about,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
if you're put on the spot to recognize somebody, it can be a little. But I want to see if you.
Are you putting me on the spot?
I'm putting you on the spot.
Oh boy, you didn't tell me.
So just listen to the guitar fills.
Okay. I have no idea.
Okay. And it fades off.
Wow,
That's you.
that's me.
That's you.
What is that? What song?
I have
is
to
that?
tell you, this is a pretty odd story.
I don't even recognize the song.
Well, 40 years ago, I was in a rock band,
Right.
and we, like all bands, were trying to find a record deal, and we had a producer, and that was one of our songs. And the producer's name was Tom Bush,
Okay.
and he took it to New York. He took our recording on a multi-track at the time 2-inch tape,
Right.
And for some reason he kept the vocals, and he replaced the instruments.
What?
Yeah, that's our singer, and he replaced all the instruments. And I remember him coming back to Utica and playing it for us. And we were, first of all, it was sort of like, geez, he replaced us, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
But I remember oh, those are pretty cool guitar parts in there. Who was that? And he goes, that's David Spinozza. And so
Wow, I don't remember.
you played on my record.
I played on your
40
record?
years ago.
Wow. I had no idea. I gotta get a copy. I have to hear it.
It's just
Hard for me to hear it off the phone too, because
Yes,
I'm a little
yes.
hard of hearing. So
Yeah, okay. But I just like the coincidence killed.
that's hysterical.
Yeah.
So we worked together.
We
sort
did.
Of. We worked together last night. We played the melody of the Duke
That's
Ellington.
right, in unison. That was
Yeah, in
fun.
unison. That was good. That was the third horn.
But the way
Yeah.
the way the business works is just like Bucky Pizzarelli told me these funny stories about. John had to tell him that he played on certain songs.
Right.
Because he just did so much of that
Yeah.
that he wouldn't
Yeah.
recognize.
That was the same with me. I mean, at the height of my career, I was playing 15 recording sessions a week and arranging 3 jingles. Like, I was just so busy. I was either writing or in the studio. And sometimes, like I said, you'd play tracks and you wouldn't hear the vocal, you wouldn't hear the song. I wouldn't be able to recognize over half the stuff I played on. Soundtracks from movies and things like that. How would you know?
Did it become a chore?
No, I enjoyed it. It was challenging and it was stressful. Like I said, I always lived in the fear. My biggest fear was they're going to find out I'm not as good as they think I am. That was probably my biggest fear.
Well, if I went down your list of recording credits on whatever website it was.
Yeah.
It was
Discography.
Discography,
Yeah.
page after page after page, and it's probably incomplete, but we might assume that the big names that pop out, the 3 of the 4 Beatles and other names like that, might have been the most memorable sessions for you. Is that necessarily true?
Yeah, because those people were, those records were visible. You were going to hear them all the time, everywhere. So those things that you remember. But I probably played on 80% of the stuff that never saw the light of day. That's the other thing. When people say, "Oh, you played on this hit record, you played on that hit record." Yeah, but thousands of records you play on never see the light of day. You don't remember them. They never went anywhere. You think about the percentage of people that have hit records. It's like winning the lottery. So most of the things you do, you don't remember.
And you don't necessarily ever hear them again either.
And never hear them again, yeah.
How do you keep track of all those sessions that you're actually getting paid for? Is that a union thing?
The union. I was in the musicians union. I did mostly union work.
Yeah.
I've done some non-union, but it was mostly musicians union. I was a member of the union since I was 14 years old. I joined it in Larchmont, which is near Mamaroneck, New York. But then when I moved to the city, I joined Local 802. And so I was with that union for over 50 years.
Did they make you prove that you could play when
No.
you went to join the union?
No, the union didn't know. You could just say you played the tambourine and probably get into the union. Yeah, they didn't care. They didn't really care. There was no music test. Thank God, I might have failed.
You've been in the union for a long time. You said you get your pay from the union.
Yeah.
And did you ever go overseas with?
I did.
That?
Yeah, one time I was MDing for Paul Williams, a songwriter. You know, he wrote Rainy Days and Mondays, and you know, wrote We've Only Just Begun. He was an unbelievable songwriter. And Kenny Escher and myself, and a few other people, we were going to go to. He was going to go on a Mary Travis show. Remember Mary Travis? She had a show in England back in the '70s.
From Peter, Paul and Mary.
Yeah. So she had a TV show in England. So Paul brought me and Kenny Escher over to augment this. We were going to get a bass player and a thing. We're going to play a couple shows, her TV show and something else. And when we got to the studio, a union delegate, an English union delegate, comes in and says, "You guys can't play on the TV show." To me and Kenny Escher. And I said, "Why not?" He said, "Well, there has to be the same amount of musicians. You know, we have to have a piano player and a guitar player in New York." There was a reciprocal union thing because there weren't. They had to hire a piano player. I could rehearse the band. I could rehearse them because I did the charts. I rehearsed the band, but they brought in an English guitar player and an English piano player. And Kenny and I were in London for a week. We had nothing to do, so we went to Paris. Because we couldn't play any of the gigs we were supposed to do with Paul. We went to Paris and we just went around Paris and went up to the Arc de Triomphe and all, the Champs-Élysées, and we just made a trip out of it because we couldn't play a note in Europe.
You can't make this stuff up.
You can't make this stuff up because there has to be the same amount of musicians in America that were there, or some kind of union rule. I never really understood it, but all I know is we were not able to back up Paul Williams.
Yeah.
On the gigs we went over there to do.
It wasn't exactly cultural exchange. There was a beef.
There was something. I don't know what it was. Mm-hmm. I never really got that involved with the union stuff. I was happy to be working,
Has any of your anticipation of an event, like you're going to play with Ringo Starr,
right?
And you might in your head be thinking, this is going to be like this, and then you get there and it's something different entirely.
Yeah, many times. Like I said, you never knew what you were walking into. Like, was there going to be an arranger? Is he a producer that really knows music, or is he just a producer that works for the label but he doesn't know music and he's expecting us to come up with the parts and you just never knew. You just never knew what it was going to be.
Can you give me a specific example of maybe like a session with Ringo or
Well, I'll give you an example of a session with McCartney. Like I did the Ram album, for instance, with McCartney. McCartney was terrific, but he would come in, no music, no chord changes, nothing. He wanted you to learn the song like a band. That's what he was used to. So he would play the song and you would just sit there and learn the song like a garage band. And he would do multiple takes, and he worked on the drum sound. He was very exacting, very good producer, Paul McCartney. I mean, and one of the probably greatest melodists of all time. So he knew what he wanted, but he would do it, band style. There was nobody wrote the changes out. Nobody wrote, play this line, or if there's a line he heard, he'd show you the line and he'd say, would you play that? Well, I'm doing this. Okay. It was like trial and error kind of thing. But he had the song written. He would know.
You come back the next day and you're expected to remember everything that happened.
Yeah, and sometimes it would be multiple days on the same song, with McCartney. So that's another thing you didn't know. As a studio musician, in a 3-hour session, you were allowed to do 4 songs. I think a total of 4 songs. You couldn't just you couldn't try to do 10 songs in a session. They limited that so that they wouldn't take advantage of the musicians, getting all these takes for less money or something. So you were allowed to do 4 songs in a 3-hour session. But with somebody like McCartney, you could do 1 song for 6 hours one day and come back and he didn't like it, take it, and then redo it again the next day for 6 hours, whatever it took.
And he didn't actually have the budget constraints.
No, he didn't, because there was no budget constraints. He's Paul McCartney, So and he was terrific. I'm not putting him down in any way, shape, or form. He deserves every credit he gets. He's a wonderful, natural songwriter, musician.
Did Paul Simon work in a similar fashion?
Paul Simon worked in a similar fashion. Yes, I did Ryman Simon with Paul. He worked in a fashion like that. He might have an arranger afterwards to write string parts or something to, what they call sweetening. They put on, violins and stuff later. But the original session with the rhythm section, he would just work with you, and you'd learn the song on the spot.
And did he usually played in the?
He usually played. He's quite a good acoustic guitar player. Mm-hmm. Paul Simon. Yeah, he's a good acoustic guitar player. So he'd play and he'd show you the song. So that's what I'm saying. You go from that, let's say, to Thad Jones, Mel Lewis, and now it's all written out. Two completely different ways of recording, And sometimes, like I said, sometimes you'd walk in, you'd work on a song for 2 days. I've done sessions where we did an album in 2 days. You did 10 tracks in 2 days. But some of the rock stuff, the pop stuff, they were more interested, the sonic thing of it too. So they'd work on drum sounds for hours. They'd work on a synth sound for hours. It was more about let's call it the soundscaping of the record, how it sounded, more so than just the notes. You know what I mean? So it's a whole different, you have to be prepared. Are we going to learn, we're going to play 17 songs in 3 hours or one song for 3 days? Very different.
You have to be patient, though.
Oh, a lot of patience. You have to be totally patient. Oh, yes. And I kind of lost my patience with some of it, honestly, because I was a quick study. And there were certain people I just didn't want to work with because of that. I really didn't want to sit there for 2 days playing the same song.
You should teach in a university.
I should?
You should.
Are you kidding me?
No, because you have the experience of a lot of the professors don't really have.
I don't know that.
It's just my opinion, but
okay.
Now you're less into the studio scene now, but at the same time there's less of a studio scene.
Oh, as far as I know, there's not really any. I mean, most of the things are done in people's apartments, or you could make a record in your bathroom today.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. I mean, I'm certainly not part of it. I'm happy that I was there in the 70s. I was there at a good time, and that was lucky, that I was there at a good time. And I think why I became somewhat of a first or second call guitarist in New York was because also I came into the transition time where the guitarists at the time were playing the big jazz boxes and stuff, and they were playing heavy scale strings and playing jazz. They came from a jazz world. I came from a rock and roll rhythm and blues world, and I was playing a Telecaster, and my sound was different. The sound was starting to change, as far as guitars, how guitars played on records and what they played. And I think because of my background of bending the strings and all this other stuff that a lot of the jazz guitarists didn't really do, and a lot of the jazz guitarists didn't really like the pop music and stuff, and I kind of liked it. So I went in with a good attitude and played a certain way that was becoming a style that was becoming the 70s style. So for me, I think a lot of my career was because I was at the right place at the right time, and my sound was something they wanted on a record. The people, a lot of the jazz guys weren't playing with that kind of sound. And that's not to put down the jazz guys, these are my favorite guys. But I'm saying at the time, it was transitioning into a different style of guitar playing, and I was right there at the time of that transition.
Was your sound connected to a certain kind of amp?
Yeah, I also liked the amp. It was a Fender amp, which was funny because I always liked the Telecaster through a Fender amp. But what happened was every studio had these Ampeg amps for some reason, because there was a club called the Manhattan Guitar Club. Here's a funny story, I'll never forget. So one of my first sessions, when I stopped bringing my own amp, because I was playing so many sessions, I couldn't drag an amp around to every studio. I'm playing in this one studio, and I plug in this Ampeg. I didn't really love the sound, but it was there. I didn't have to drag my amp, so I played through it. And the guitar player next to me was in this club called the Manhattan Guitar Club. And he says, are you in the club? And I said, what club? He said, you can't play through that amp. You have to be in the club. I forget which guitarist it was, and I said, what club? And there's a key, and you have to turn the key to be able to, and what you have to do is you have to give them $150, and each amp was $75, and they would put those amps in the different studios. So if you were in the club, you could go around and use those amps. Now, some of the engineers hot-wired it without the key, so I was playing sort of through a hot-wired amp, and this guy said, "We'll invite you to the dinner, and you should be in the club because we hear you're getting a lot of calls and you're doing a lot of work. You should be in the club." I get called to this dinner, and I go, it's 40 guitar players, that are all studio musicians, and I'm like the newbie, and they're basically saying, hey kid, you got to join the club. And I wound up joining this thing called the Manhattan Guitar Club. I had to give them $150, and they put a $75 amp in 2 different studios, and now I had the key, and I didn't have to drag my... But the thing is, I didn't really love the way those amp pegs sounded with my telly. They sounded great for the bass, but it wasn't my favorite amp. It was really funny. But yeah, I had to join
did the guy have 2 big bodyguards with him?
It was like the mafia of guitar. Of the New York guitar scene.
I can imagine if I'll join your club, but get something besides Ampeg, will you?
Yeah. Can't you put a twin in here or a concert? Well, I used to play to the Fender Bassman with the 410-inch. That was my sound. The Telly with the Fender bass 410s. That was the real Telecaster hillbilly sound that came from down south. All the guys played like that. I loved that sound. That was my sound. That's what I was going after, and I kind of brought that to New York in a certain way.
That's a great story. Did you know when you were playing on a hit?
No. In fact, I played on Bye Bye Miss American Pie. Okay?
That's where I was thinking.
It's really funny because I guess the producer knew that the studio musicians weren't going to tolerate playing this song over and over again for a lot. So he rehearsed Don McLean for weeks by himself with his bass player, and then he called me and Paul Griffin, the piano player, to be the 2 studio guys on the record. So when we get there, we're writing it down. I'll never forget this. And I say to Don McLean, you really should cut out some verses. This is really too long. This will never get on the radio. How wrong was I? I said, they only last 2 minutes, 2:30, maybe 3 minutes on a record, on a 45. This is never going to be on the radio. And then the producers, I think John Simon was like, shut up, Spinozza, just play the part. And anyway, the rest was history.
And that tune has some odd measures in it every once in a while.
And also had rubato. Remember, it starts like out of time.
Yep. There
was no records that started out of time and then went into time and then went out of time. And that long, that was a rare, how they even got airplay with that is amazing.
Do you remember if he sang what? The vocal we hear, is that the thing he was singing?
Well, he sang, once again, we'll call it the dummy vocal. He sang live with his playing. But then I think he went in and fixed stuff. Because like we were talking earlier, on a record, a record has to last a lot of listens. You can't have out-of-tune singing so they would go and fix a lot. Apparently John Simon said that there's like 50 edits or something on that record. You don't hear that. But that was, that was a very put together record.
Have you ever had a solo that came out that had been, quote, put together? Like you did 3 or 4, and then the producer...
Oh yeah, some, yeah. The one solo I did that didn't get put together, but it's a weird thing. I don't know if you heard the Dr. John story. Do you know that story? Would you like me to tell it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was at Atlantic Records one day, I think working on an Aretha Franklin record. And Atlanta has a main studio, and then they had like a mixing room studio. And Dr. John was in the mixing room with, I forgot who was producing. I was either Arif Martin was working with, or Joel Dorn, one of those producers. I was working with both of them a lot at the time. So I was on my way to a jingle date. It was like 1:30, and I had to go to a 2 o'clock jingle date. I just finished a 10 to 1 at Atlantic. I'm at the elevator with my guitar, my gig bag, getting ready to go to my next session. And Dr. John comes out of the mix room, and he sees me. Hey, Spinozza. With that Dr. John, hey man, what you doing? You got a minute? I said, yeah, what's up? He said, man, we forgot to put a sax solo on this tune. Can you come and play a little solo for me? I said, okay. So I go in the mix room. There's a little amp in the corner, a little Fender, thank God, in the corner. Mics it up, because it really wasn't a studio. It was just we were in the studio, in a little mix room. So he says, it's an E flat. And they roll right to the place where I'm going to solo. So I don't hear the song. There's like a 4-bar thing, and I go to play the solo. So I play the solo, and I realize my G string is a little out of tune because I just had the guitar in the bag. And I said, so I play the solo. I play this note that I really didn't like, and it's out of tune. So I bend it up to mess around, and I bend it to like an augmented fifth, which is not a great blues bend. And I play the solo, and I go, you know what? let me try another one. Let me do it. He goes, well, you said, it was magic. That was magic. Get out of here. I said, no, come on. I can play something better. Get out of here. And they throw me out of the studio. And he goes, you're the one that said you got to go to the next session. So I leave the studio, and I felt really like, oh man, what the hell did I just play? I could have played a better solo. 2 months later, I'm in the taxi cab. 3 guitars in the back. I've got my acoustic, my 12-string, my telly. I'm going to a session. The song comes on, right time, wrong place. Cab driver says, oh, you're a guitar player. You'll listen, my new favorite solo. He turns it up. A knee-jerk reaction. I go, that's me. He goes, yeah, right, buddy. And he turns it down. I had to go to Colony Shop to buy the record. And I hear, to this day, I hear that overbent note, and it drives me crazy. And it became this like iconic solo.
Go figure.
And that was what, one take, and it wasn't like, they wouldn't let me play another note. I was like, come on, give me another shot. Nope.
And at that point, you had never even heard what came before or what came after?
I never heard it. They went right 4 bars. Here's 4 bars. It's in E flat. Let's play some blues. That was it.
Did you get paid for it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh. Kismet, I guess.
Yeah, it was bizarre. One of those bizarre right time, wrong place, right time, right place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a right time, wrong, what's the worst session you ever did? Worst gig?
The worst gig I ever did?
Worst gig ever, anything come to mind like, oh man, that just was...
Well, I remember a gig that was a little painful as far as like, I was at the record plant. We were going to do, trying to think of his name, who sang Freedom at Woodstock.
Oh yeah.
Jesus, I can't think of his name. I'm losing my brain. Richie Havens.
Richie Havens, yeah.
And it was Charlie Colello was producing Richie Havens. And Charlie was a great arranger. He did all the Four Seasons arrangements and stuff like that. You know, he's the one that came up with da 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 da. Great arranger. But he's producing Richie Havens. And somebody was playing drums. He was not happy with the drummer. He kept changing the drum part, and the drummer couldn't remember like what he wanted. He would start to take, and we'd get to the part, and he wouldn't play what Charlie wanted. And Charlie was a great arranger, really great pop arranger. But for some reason, something was happening. He wasn't happy with the drummer, and Richie was getting nervous. Richie's used to playing with folk singers and playing with guys, and all of a sudden he's being produced by Charlie Colello, and Charlie got upset with the drummer and threw his pencil down and walked out of the studio, got in the cab and left, and just left us all in the studio. And Richie was like, I didn't know what to say to Richie. The drummer was embarrassed, and that was a strange session. I walked out just feeling really like, wow, we were all trying to do the right thing, but Charlie wasn't happy, and he just slammed his pencil down on the podium and walked out and got a cab and went home. Never finished the record. That was a weird moment in the studio.
Yeah. Well, no one got hurt except their feelings.
There was no blood. It wasn't Vietnam. It's okay. Yeah.
So what's up next for you? How do you keep yourself busy?
I'm golfing on Tuesday.
All right.
I'll be skiing in the winter. That's kind of what I do now.
Well, you've had a hell of a career. I'll tell you that. It
was kind of a crazy run.
Yeah. And a great example of literally, playing things by ear and learning on the job, and I really respect that.
Well, thanks. Thank you. I didn't know it was going to be that way. I'm glad it happened.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time today.
Yeah, great talking to you.
All right,
and it was great
David.
Playing for you last night.
Thank you very much.
Great playing with you last night.
Absolutely. That was a thrill for me. Now I can say, hey, guess who I played with the other
I can
day?
say the same thing.
All right. Over and out.